Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
Welcome to our noon book review. Today we're going to hear about a book called How to Win a Local Election, and our book reviewer, his name is Mark Grimm from Mark Grimm Communications. Mark is also a member of the Guilderland Town Board, and he's also managed 8 political campaigns. So here's Mark Grimm.
Okay, thank you very much, Joe, and thanks for putting this program together. I think it's a great idea, a noon book review. I think it's a terrific series, and it's really a privilege to be a part of it. And it's great for everybody watching at home. Hello, and I hope you enjoy this program as well. I am Mark Grimm of Mark Grimm Communications. It's a public speaking, training, and media relations firm that's based in Guilderland. And today we're going to talk about this book, How to Win a Local Election, by Judge Lawrence Gray. And one of the things I like about the author is that he's been involved himself as a candidate, because there's no learning like being a candidate yourself in terms of how to win, because once you put your name in there, you'll learn that there's 100 people with advice, but none of them are necessarily showing up on Saturday morning to knock on doors with you. So that's really one of the big things to learn from a candidate perspective. But I thought we'd give an overview of the book, and I think it's a good overview of what it takes, step by step, to win in local elections. And if you can win a local election, you can win any election, because ultimately it's about convincing people to vote for you, and many of the same principles that apply locally apply nationally even. All right, interesting stat in the book to start out. 557,000 elective offices nationwide. So it isn't like there isn't a lot of opportunity for people to get involved in politics. 557,000 offices. And the truth is there's only a small percentage of the country ever consider running. And that's a shame, because as we limit the pool of applicants, the results are affected. The more people we can get involved to actually consider running, the better democracy we're going to have, just by the nature of the numbers. But certainly there's plenty of opportunity for anybody who's interested in running for office. It's a growth opportunity. It's just a matter of really deciding that you can do it. And I really believe, instead of having a lot of lawyers, that we need a broader spectrum of people involved in politics if, in fact, we're really going to be representing everyone. Gray says he calls it a how-to book written for a first-time candidate. So he's pretty candid up front that this is geared for someone who's never run before. But I will say this, I've seen a lot of candidates run who did not embrace a lot of the principles that he was talking about in this book, and some of them have run 2 or 3 times. So there are things in this book that typically a lot of candidates do not utilize to their detriment. So it is a great introductory book for a first-time candidate, but it is a very good primer, I think, on anybody who's running for office. Because the challenge in running for office, there are 100 things you'd like to do, and the reality is you can't get them all done. So you really have to make judgments about what you're able to get done and what you can't get done. First thing is to know the rules. The State Board of Election website, which we list here, is very good in terms of what it takes actually to get involved. There's free booklets on this that you can download from the site, or they'll send you, and it lays out the rules for being an official candidate. And also from the Albany County Board of Elections. Actually, just easy to Google Albany County Board of Elections. Their web name is so long. But specifically, what are the requirements here in Albany County if you want to run for Town of Colonie, council or supervisor, or if you want to run in Guilderland? Those specific issues also can be addressed by the Albany County Board of Election. They're the 2 jurisdictions that govern elections in the state: your county board and then your state board. The first thing that the author talks about in terms of the candidate is, would I vote for me? Some people are thinking about running. You really have to ask yourself that question and really be objective about it. What is it you bring to the table? Why should someone vote for you? I've done a fair amount of training of candidates, many of them state candidates, assembly candidates, and I'll ask them why I should vote for them, and they'll give me a 3.5-minute answer. And they'll go on and on and on and say, well, whoa. It's 30 seconds. If you can't explain in 30 seconds why it matters to the voter that you should get elected, then you have a clarity problem. So the key is this: what is the strong rationale for running, other than, gee, I'd like to get elected? Well, who cares? The reality is you have to be able to tell the voter. And this where this really comes into play is when you're going door to door. Because essentially, hi, you say, hi, I'm Mark Grimm, I'm running for office, I just want to drop by and say hello. And oftentimes that's all they want to hear, and you just leave them a card, and that's fine. But if you get their attention, then you have 30 seconds to say why it matters, and that's the only 30 seconds you're going to get with that candidate. So it's one thing to go door to door, it's another thing to make an impression when you get there. And part of that is having a strong rationale for why you should get elected. A little bit of crunching the numbers. We know how people vote. We have a secret ballot. We don't know how an individual votes, but we know how district votes. We keep track of that every year. And that's a tremendous marketing advantage, a tremendous advantage. I know I can look at the results from election, and I can tell you by election districts, we're familiar with the term precincts, but the real term is election districts. Every voting jurisdiction in the country is divided into election districts. And you can look at these results every year, and you can really tell how generally how they're going to vote within a certain margin. You look at the worst race that a Republican has run there, and maybe the best race, and somewhere in between there that's where the Republican vote's going to be. Same with the Democratic vote. So by analyzing these districts, you look for the districts that have a big turnout and the different districts that have a big swing vote. Because there are some districts where it doesn't matter how much you campaign there, they're pretty much going to vote the same way. And there are other districts that are more open to the particular candidate. Well, that's where you want to spend most of your time, or at least place more emphasis on your time in those districts where the potential for swinging voters is. So identifying that swing voters, it can be done. It's just a matter of an analysis of the votes that have taken place over the last several years. So there isn't any guesswork in terms of the analysis of the numbers. Every year the election board reports these numbers, and any citizen can go and look at them. And that's really the basis of the formula plan about how you run. Getting on the ballot. Does anybody have any idea how you actually get on the ballot? So I want to run. Okay, then what do I do? Does anybody know exactly how we get on the ballot? Yeah.
You have to get a certain number of signatures.
How many? Any idea?
Would it depend on the office?
Yeah, that's right, Joe. It's the law is very specific about how many petition signatures. Now, the idea behind a petition, of course, is you just can't have anybody just signing up. You could have 100 people running for office. So there has to be some mechanism for determining who actually gets on the ballot. And that mechanism is for you as a candidate to demonstrate you can actually go out and get people to sign to say it's okay if this person is on the ballot. Now, most people are willing to do it, but it shows a certain amount of effort. And here, for example, in Colonie, it's 5%. If you want to run as a Republican, it's 5% of the registered Republicans in Colonie. And it depends on the office because it depends on the jurisdiction. If it's a bigger jurisdiction, then obviously you need more signatures. But ultimately, it's about getting this list that they'll provide, and names and addresses, and you just go door to door and ask people to say, gee, I'd like to get on the ballot, would you mind signing? Just to give you a little example, from Albany County Legislative District. Now, Albany County has, I think, 39 legislative districts, which is one of the largest legislatures in the state, maybe in the country, for a county this size. So the districts are really like about 7,600 people. They're not very large. So if you, for example, want to run as a Democrat in the 31st Albany County Legislative District, which is in Guilderland, where I live, there's 1,800 enrolled Democrats about. So if you multiply that by 5%, your requirement is to get 90 valid signatures. Now, if you go out and which is doable, one person could do that. There's usually a time frame. It's usually a part of June and July every year where you go out in the summer and start knocking on doors. And of course, the one caveat there, if you're running to be a Democrat, you have to get Democrat signatures. If you're running to be a Republican, you have to get Republican signatures, which makes sense. You must be a registered Democrat in that district, or a registered Republican if you're getting Republican ones. Now, the Republican ones is a little bit different based on the number of registered Republicans. No one just gets 90 valid signatures. You want to get more than that because some of them could be challenged. Generally, the signatures, you hand in your signatures, they're accepted by the board. The only way, there has to be a challenge for someone to review them. And oftentimes, the challenge comes from the opponent. So if somebody hands in 90 valid signatures, chances are I might challenge that, because if there's only one invalid signature, they're off. They're off. So you want to, the rule of thumb is try to get twice as many. Now the book says 3 to 1, but that's an awful lot, particularly in bigger races. But you just want to make sure that everything is filled out. New York traditionally has been awful in terms of requirements. There's been situations where, if they didn't have the name exactly there, they were kicking it out or something, and then the whole page would get tossed. So they've lessened that a little bit, especially after what happened in 2000, where people's votes weren't getting counted. So the federal courts are of the mind, if we're pretty clear how the intent of the voter was, then they want the vote to count. But in terms of petition signatures, it's one way incumbents have managed to keep challengers off the ballot, because incumbents have staffs and who know all these things. But for a challenger, you really have to learn that you have to be pretty specific on these petitions, or else they can get invalidated. But once you get your signatures, you submit them, your name is going on the ballot. Now, what happens if there's somebody else wants to be running as a Democrat in that district? They would have to do the same thing. They would have to get valid signatures, and they couldn't have the same person sign both. That's the only exception. And then what would you think happens if there's 2 people that have valid signatures? There'd be a primary. That's what causes primaries. When more than one person wants to run and more than one person has submitted valid signatures, the only way to determine it is by a vote. So the signatures are submitted in July, and the primary in New York is in September. And the winner of the primary that's the person whose name is going on that ballot. Okay, financial reporting. You have to keep track of where you get your contributions. The theory behind that is that people have a right to know, in terms of disclosure, who's giving the candidate money. So one of the first things you have to do when you declare a candidacy is to open up a file with a financial report, and then select a treasurer. And the treasurer cannot be the candidate. That's the law. Someone else has to be the treasurer. Now you can help the treasurer, keep track of the records and all, but ultimately it's the treasurer that has to sign the form and submit it. And again, all of these calendars, dates when you have to submit the forms are listed in the booklet that describes financial reporting. And the limits sometimes are affected by how many voters there are. Again, in Gildan, for example, there's a limit to how much you can contribute to a town candidate based on the number of registered voters in the town. And so each office has limits, and obviously you want to be aware of what those limits are, because if you take money that's beyond the limit, then the law's been violated. Thematic single-mindedness is the way the author terms what I would call having a disciplined message. You can't decide that this is why you're running in March, and then get tired of saying the same message over and over again for 3 months, and then in June say, well, I got a different message. And then, especially if you're doing a lot of door-to-door, you get tired of it. And I've seen candidates, in September, they want something fresh and new, so they start working on something else. The key is really decide in the beginning why it matters that you get elected, and then keeping that thematic single-mindedness throughout the campaign. And that means when you meet somebody and say explain why they should vote for you, in your literature, in your key cards, which you hand out at the door, all of those things should be saying the same message. And I've seen campaigns where the website says one thing, their commercials say another, their mailings say another. It's very hard to get through to people today with all the communication that's out there. So one of the ways to getting through to people with the message is making sure that every time you connect with them, you have the same thing to say. And that would be the rationale for why you should get elected. All right, and having a plan. All right, I want to get elected. I'm running. I'm passionate about what I can do. I think I can make a difference. The question is, how does that happen? What is the step-by-step approach for getting elected? I like to liken a campaign to like starting a small business. You have to think in terms of, okay, how do I raise money for, quote, my company? What's the best way to raise money? Ask people. That's a profound statement. It seems simple. But you'd be amazed at how many candidates don't ask for money. By that I mean everyone you know. Identify everyone you know and then ask them for money. Some people won't do it for a couple of reasons. They're not organized enough. They don't have addresses for everyone they know. Or secondly, they're a little squeamish about it. A lot of people are squeamish about asking for money. But I always felt if you really feel strongly that you're the right candidate, then you should be able to ask people for money. And now my feeling is if I'm going door to door from 10 o'clock in the morning to 6 o'clock at night on a Saturday in 90-degree heat, then maybe I feel comfortable enough saying, hey, how about pitching in with a check? But the number one reason people don't raise money is they don't ask for it, and that's the way to start. But also have a reason for saying why somebody should write a check. Fundraising plan, organizing your volunteers. Who is it that you know that wants to help you? And are there people that are more committed that might be able to give you a little more time? So what I think one of the first things to do is to identify who is really willing to help you and identify in their own mind what's their commitment. Now I'm all for it. If somebody says, Mark, I can only give you 2 hours a week, I say, great. I'll give you 2 hours of work a week. What you want to shy away from is somebody, I'll be there, 15 hours a week, and then 3 weeks later they got something else to do. So what you want to identify is some close friends or family who can make a commitment. Then once they identify how much time they have, put them to use, whether it's a volunteer coordinator, someone who's going to take the time to call up volunteer and say, hey, I'm going door to door on Saturday at 10 o'clock. Will you meet Mark on Smith Street and go door to door with him? Because the more people you have with you going door to door, the more doors you can hit. Because ultimately it's about hitting the doors. And one of the great wastes of a candidate's time, of course, is to be knocking on a door and no one's home. So it's really great to have somebody with you who, if someone's not there, they just leave a card. And if somebody comes there, then you say, I'm a volunteer for Mark Grimm. He's in the neighborhood. He'd like to meet you. And then if you can, they wave you over and you go and you meet people. You want to spend as much time at the doors, what I call hitting flesh, shaking hands with people and making an impression upon them. Another part of the plan is how you're going to get your message out. And this is generally with mailing in a local election. Understand that people get deluged with junk mail every day. So you have to say, okay, why would they pick out my mail piece and read it? And the answer there is it has to be a simple, straightforward message. It doesn't have to have a lot of text. A simple message. Boom, I'm this. This is what I think is wrong with the incumbent. This is what I would do to make things better. And that's it. Then you get out. And if you can, make it visual, if you can, because people identify with things that are visual. But too often mailings have too much text in them. People don't read that stuff. They toss it. You have a challenge. People make a decision in a second whether or not they're going to read your mail piece. So from a consumer standpoint, you have to think of that when you're creating the mail piece. What's your plan for that? A little bit about the candidates. You don't need all the votes, the author says, and I really like that. One of the mistakes I've seen candidates make is they're in a room, they're very sincere, and they're trying to listen to everybody, and somebody says this, and they say, okay, and somebody says that, and they're trying to give everybody a little bit, and you can't do it. If you try to please everybody, that's a recipe for getting everyone mad at you. You really have to decide early on what your rationale is, what you believe in. And if somebody disagrees with you, then you say you respect that, but that's really not where I'm coming from. This is what I stand for, and I'm sticking to it. And that's easier said than done, because it isn't that politicians are necessarily naturally dishonest. Some of them are, and some of them aren't. Obviously, you have to judge each one. But it's a hard thing to be in a group where you're trying to win them over and to disagree with them. But the fact of the matter is, in the end, you only need 50% plus one to win. So it isn't a necessity anyway that you please everyone. You just try to be consistent and honest and consistently stand for the kinds of things you believe. Any questions so far?
Yeah, what are
yes.
some of the flamboyant ways of promoting the candidate?
What are some of the flamboyant ways of promoting the candidate? By flamboyant, I think you mean eye-catching.
Eye-catching.
How do you get their attention? Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question, because it is marketing, obviously, and some of the things you see in marketing are effective and some aren't. They just look at commercials, for heaven's sakes. And the reality is you have to be careful, because it's one thing to get somebody's attention, but it doesn't do you any good if they think you're a jerk by what you did. So I think that the best way to get somebody's attention, in my view, is to knock on their door, because then there's a personal connection. But it's okay to be colorful, but you have to be careful. There's a difference between getting their attention and earning their attention and earning their respect. And the bottom line is to talk about what matters to them. Because ultimately, your candidacy is not about you. It's about the people whose votes you're trying to attract. So I think one of the best things is to learn about what they care about. I'll give you a good example. I was running in Rochester. years and years ago, and I was knocking on these doors for county legislature, and nobody wanted to talk about the county legislature. They wanted to talk about a road project that was going on in their neighborhood. So they kept asking me, what's this road project? I have to detour, and the trucks are in here. So I said, you know what, I'll find out. So I went to the town. I said, explain to me the details of the road project. What's the schedule? What's going to happen? So I got all the details. I created a one-page flyer that says, many of you are concerned about this road project. Here's the schedule. Here's where they're going to be on different streets. This is what's going to take. This is when they're going to finish. And I just distributed flyers to that whole neighborhood. I got 68% of the vote in that election district. Now, they didn't say, oh, gee, Mark, you're running for county legislature. This is a town matter. That doesn't count. So their attitude was, someone listened to me about my concern, did some digging, and then answered the concern with information that was useful to me. So you say, was that flamboyant? No. But it really struck a chord because it listened to people and it responded with information they can use. And even though I was running against a 16-year incumbent, I got 68% of the vote in that district. And it didn't really cost any money. It took a little time and some flyers, and that was it. Okay? Yeah. Yes.
Does the author go into negative campaigning?
He doesn't talk a lot about negative campaigning. The reality is everybody has a different idea what negative campaigning means. People say, why does he so much negative campaigning? Well, in some parts because it works. I mean, if it stopped working, they wouldn't do it. But some negative campaigning works and some negative campaigning does work. And I think the whole ball game is tone. It's the tone. This person did this, which we think was wrong. We think this is the way it should be. Some people might say that's an attack. Well, it depends on your perspective, I guess. I think comparative advertising is the way to go. You may not be aware this person did X, Y, and Z, and I think that's wrong. And I would offer you A, B, and C, as opposed to say that candidate's a no-good SOB. That has less effectiveness. But a lot of times it's the tone of the commercial and the tone of the voice that's used. And it's also the candidate standing in the community. If you're you're a pillar of the community, you've been there 30 years, and you run for office for the first time, and people know you and they start attacking you, that's not going to work. In fact, there's going to be a backlash. But if you're a new candidate and people really don't know you, and they start to frame who you are before you can, then they're going to draw some blood. Now, when I ran last year in Guilderland, the local paper was inundated with attack letters against me, and almost all of them were town employees or somebody on the town payroll or some town connection. But you would have thought I was Attila the Hun. But the reality was I had been to so many homes and made a personal connection with people. I think what they were saying is, that's not the person I met at the door. And if I hadn't made the personal connection, I would have went down in flames based on the negative perceptions they were trying to create. So a lot of that, it's helpful to have a name in terms of negative advertising. It's helped to already have an established brand in your community, because then people are saying, well, I know Joe Nash and he's not like that. In fact, the jerk who's saying these things, I'm really going to vote against.
And maybe you should tell people about you were the first in Guilderland.
Yeah, there wasn't much of a party there because you're out of power. That's traditionally the case. The people in power have a stronger organization because they have jobs to give out, or they have money, contracts to give out. So we really didn't have much of an organization. I just decided to change things. I started knocking on doors in April, and we knocked out 2 Democratic incumbents who had been there a long time, me and my friend Warren Redlick. And it was largely due to this grassroots effort. It was the first time in 10 years a Republican had won in Guilderland. Now in two, yeah. And I think there are only two Democratic incumbents who lost in all of the county. I'm not sure about that, but it doesn't happen very often because Albany County is a Democratic county. But it does show you that regardless of your party, you can make a difference and you can win elections. But you have to be willing to work, which is really item 1, is where everybody's a strategist. Everybody thinks there's a strategy that's going to pull off the election. And I say my definition of leadership is if it's 90 degrees and there's a trench that has to be dug, the leader's the first one to pick up a shovel. And that's what really wins elections, is hard work. Now, you have to have a strategy, you have to have a plan, but if you're not willing to work, you're not going to do it. But I also like the idea that the author talks about, don't try to please everybody. Okay, a mailing list. We know from our elections who we want to mail to. I'll give you an example again in Guilderland. There's maybe 35,000 people in Guilderland, and 22,000 of them are registered, but they're not going to vote in a local election. We know there's some people only vote for president, and then there's others maybe just vote for governor or something, or others that don't vote at all. They just signed up when they were getting their driver's license, and they have no interest in voting. So again, we know who those people are because we keep track of it every year with the elections. So in Guilderland, I know, for example, the potential vote for an off-year election is 14,000 voters, because I've studied the off-year votes, and 14,000 people have voted or are likely to vote. Now, out of those, there's 6,000 to vote every year. They're into politics. You know, you may be like that. I'm like that. It doesn't matter who's running. I'm going to vote. And the other 8,000, some of them might vote, some of them may vote. It depends on the day they decide. But ultimately, those 14,000 people are my target audience. I'm not mailing to people who I know aren't going to vote because it costs money. So that's a way of really getting the bang for your buck, is identifying who the universe is. And we have that mailing list from the County Board of Elections. In fact, you can get it as a disk file and then sort it any way you want. You can sort it by election districts. You can sort it by Democrat, Republican, or Independents. You can even sort it by birthday, if enough, for the people that have listed their age there. So, so there's a lot of ways you can sort it. You can certainly sort it by street. A lot of different ways of sorting the mailing and then identifying, what your target audience is. You have your own mailing list. All the people you know. They're all potential volunteers. They're all potential donors. They're all potential people that can help you out and also vote for you. So, and you have a large circle of friends. And you know what? Your friends and family have a circle of friends. Do they all know what your message is? And even with my business, at Thanksgiving, I'm a lot of fun. I quiz my family about what I do for a living. Because if they can't tell me what I do for a living in a clear, compelling way, then that's my fault. Because everybody that they meet may be a potential prospect for my business. And it's the same with your candidacy. If you're running, everyone you know should not only know that you're running, and in some cases, the worst thing you want to hear is, oh, I didn't even know Susan was running. That's, what? What was Susan doing for the last 6 months? Everyone you know should know you're running, and everyone you know should know your message, so they can say, oh, well, how do you like Joe? Oh, I like Joe, good guy, and his plan is blah, blah, blah. I said, oh, okay, that sounds good. So it's funny, it seems like common sense, but it's overlooked most of the time. That most people don't tell everyone they know they're running, and they don't tell them what their message is. And you also can purchase list. You may have a specific issue that you know is going to resonate well with a particular group of people. And you are able to buy that list from people who spend their time, coming up with these lists for these particular groups. And if it's a very compelling message, buying a list can be worth it. The Postal Service, Business Mail 101, the book talks about. It's a great spot to look. Understanding mail, the post office will help you because they want you to do business with them. They're in business like anybody else. And they actually have a spot on their website called Business Mail 101 where it takes you through all the differences in mail. Because in a local election, your mail is, it can be 80%, maybe 90% of your campaign. That's where, television is a little bit too big. Colonie is, for example, is a town of 80,000 in a market of maybe 1 million people. It's not the most efficient thing to be buying commercials to reach 1 million people when you know there aren't going to be that many voters that are going to the polls. Mail, you know who the voters are, you know who the prime voters are, you can mail to them with your message. And the more you understand, what size mailers to send and how do you sort it, all that stuff affects the rate. For example, there's a difference, and he talks about the difference between automated mail and non-automated mail. Sounds fancy, but basically automated mail is the barcode stuff. Because it's barcoded, the post office can handle it more efficiently, and as a result, they charge less. So if your mail is barcoded, it's going to cost you a lot. Now, if you're talking about 10,000 pieces, and you're talking a 10-cent difference, you're talking some real money. And you don't have to be an expert in barcoding. You can hire a mailing house. You give them the list, and they can send out the mail, and they'll barcode it and sort it and do all that for you. Now, they'll charge you, but it's money well spent because you're going to be saving money on the mail. Non-automated mail has to be sorted when it's bulk by zip code, but you don't have any of the barcode stuff. It costs more, but you can do that in your living room with 6 or 7 volunteers, and you can save a little bit of money that way. Okay, the key to success. Door to door. And he talks a little bit about this at the end of the book, but I can endorse that philosophy. The more that we have all this technology and all this communication, the more that we see of it, the more important door-to-door becomes, because it's the last bastion of the personal connection, and it's free. It's the one hope for challengers who are faced with all this large special interest money that all the incumbents have. And it doesn't matter, Democrat or Republican, the special interest money goes to the incumbents. And the only way to fight that really is to go door to door and say, this is what I believe, and I hope you'll vote for me. And that's the best way to make an impression with someone. And also, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
If somebody takes the time to come to my door, ask to vote for that person, regardless of the party I do, it's very seldom does somebody come.
Yeah. But because it proves things. It says commitment. You could talk to your blue in the face about how committed you are, but if you're knocking on somebody's door at 95 degrees, that's commitment. But you also give them a chance to size you up, as I like to put it. And I've seen people looking at me and say, you're sizing me up, aren't you? They are. And I say, look, let me tell you why it matters to you that I get elected, not to me. And I say, a big mistake people make is they talk about them. And I'm there, I'm saying, look, this is why I can help you in 30 seconds. This is why I can help you, and that's why I need your support. And it's a way of getting feedback, too. I think it's invaluable. I got a lot of feedback, and I listened. You know what? So, after about 5,000 homes, certainly it affected my message, because I said, I know what Gittleton cares about. I've been talking with them for the last 5 months. So it was very instrumental to me to say, this is what they care about, and this is what's going in my message. So, or sometimes when you're wrong, people will say, hey, I like you, Mark, but I think you're off on this one. I said, well, 100 people are saying that. I say, maybe I'm not as smart as I think I am. So it's a great feedback tool, but also a way to make an impression and say, I'm committed, I want your support. And it's also a way of building up volunteers, too. I've got people say, yeah, I like you. How do I help you? I said, well, here's my volunteer sheet, and bring that with you, a volunteer sheet where you can fill out the form and their contact information, and then have somebody call them later and say, hey, you indicated you wanted to help Mark. He's going door to door on Saturday. Would you like to help him? And sometimes they'll say, well, no, second thoughts, I'm busy. It is hard to get volunteers, but you certainly want to make the effort and make sure if there are people that want to help you, make sure you allow them, give them the tools to be able to help you. Okay, anything else about door to door? Yes.
I like it when a person comes is successful in business or has some kind of track record.
Yeah. What are you bringing to the table? Am I just, have I been a career politician and now I want another office? Or have you been out there running a business, or show your accomplishments. This isn't a 10-page report. Give me 3 bullets that say you've really accomplished something in your life, because I want to see accomplished people. And the reality, a lot of those people are too busy to run. Again, the pool of applicants we get for politics is way too small, and as a result, we suffer as a democracy. So it's really important to, among ourselves, to identify good people. A lot of people never even think of running. My brother Peter's a good example. He was a civic volunteer for 25 years. If they're cleaning the alleys, my brother Peter was there. He's putting up wreaths on doors so that he's donating his time for. And I said, if you're not the kind of person that ought to be running for politics, I don't know who is. And after 10 years, I convinced him to run. And he ran, and he was the only Democrat who got elected in the city of Troy when he ran on the county legislature. So it can happen, but you have to be able to identify and support the candidates. It isn't just about running yourself, because not everybody's meant to be a candidate, but it's identifying people in your community who you think are honorable and it can make a contribution. And then once you ask them to run, is to help them and to get friends to help them. Because this grassroots, you hear a lot about grassroots, it really does matter if in fact you can bring a bunch of people together and knock on doors. You give me 5 volunteers who are, working their tails off, and I can take over the world. It is a hard thing to get one really good volunteer who's there working with you all the time. The keys, in the campaign and going door to door, is to have a clear message, not to meander back and forth about why maybe you should get elected, or the same old blah, blah, blah that you hear from the state legislature. That stuff drives me crazy. But blah, 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 we need to, bring New York back. People are leaving the state. Oh, really? That's been happening for 40 years. And neither party has done anything about it. So that kind of blah, blah, blah stuff is not going to cut it. Have a clear message about what you can do for them. Make a positive impression. There's no substitute for enthusiasm or sincerity. Boom, you have 30 seconds, honest, sincere message, demonstrating that you're really committed. There's no more powerful message than that. And again, keep your ears open. You will pick up things that are valuable that nobody else is getting. And particularly the incumbents who, get a little comfortable in office, they know what was going on in the community maybe 3 or 4 years ago. But it's funny how things can change in your community. And if you're going door to door, you're picking up on those changes. And if you're smart, you'll capitalize on that feedback in your message and in your mail. Okay, well, thank you very much for your attention. And I appreciate your input, and I'm glad folks are watching at home. But I do want to give people a chance now to ask any more questions about, a candidacy. Yes?
When you were on Phil Donahue, what were some of the challenging questions?
All right, Phil Donahue story. Okay. I don't know if you remember when Bush 41 and Dan Rather had an interview, and it got really testy. There was an argument. This is years and years ago. This is back in the mid to late 80s. Well, I was an anchorman in Rochester, and I interviewed a county executive candidate out there, Monroe County executive, right after the election. And I asked him some tough questions. And he said, what is this, another Dan Rather interview or something like that? This was because this was like fresh in everybody's mind. I said, no, sir, it's not. You said that you were going to change politics, and your campaign manager is now your deputy county executive. And I had a list of facts that I challenged him with. And so he made a big thing about it, and I just... Yes, it was 6 o'clock news. I was the 6 o'clock anchor. So that tape got sent to the Phil Donahue show because he interviewed Sam Donaldson about the Bush Rather thing. And sure enough, Phil Donahue said, we're going to use this tape too. So they used the tape of this interview on the Phil Donahue show. And Sam Donaldson was talking about Mark Grimm's interview in Rochester, New York. But it was a really interesting story because the whole idea was, how tough should a journalist be? And they should be tough, but they shouldn't be one-sided. And you shouldn't. And I was respectful, even though he was losing his cool. If I started yelling back, the story would have been it was just a shouting match. Instead, I said, "No, sir. The issues are A, B, and C, and I'd like you to respond to them." So we got 300 phone calls to the newsroom after the interview. It was on the front page of the D&C, which is the Rochester Daily, the next 2 days, and they actually printed the entire transcript of the interview, and they did some editorials as well. And this is something completely unexpected. I had, of course, no idea that this was going to happen. But, fortunately, I kept my cool and stayed firm, which is really what you should do in politics, is to be firm and keep your cool. And I recognize that's easier said than done.
Well, question about it. You said message is important.
Yep.
And then you were saying blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Obviously, because you recommend in the book, or you don't just go out there and say, we got to stop people moving from New York. You can't just...
Oh, yeah, no, and it is the book. He talks a lot about the thematic single-mindedness, is to really, talk about what really matters and then drive that home. And it just can't be vague. There are too many vague messages out there and say, well, I'm for good government. Okay, terrific. Who isn't? It's like the financial planners I have for clients. I say, why should somebody pick you? The financial planners are a dime a dozen. He says, because of my integrity. I say, oh, that's great. I've never met a financial planner that said, I'm great with numbers. I'm a little short in the integrity department, but I'm great with numbers. That's really not a statement you can make for yourself. You have to have other people make that statement. And you have to be specific about, if your broad theme is fairness and openness, okay, how does that apply specifically to my life? And I'll give you some examples, which I think the government is unfair. I think the assessment process isn't fair. Not everybody's treated fairly. So that's an example that has a direct impact on everybody, because everybody's local taxes, of course, are affected by what their assessment is. So it's important to have a theme, Joe, but also have specific examples in their lives that relate directly to the theme. And that's something that simply just isn't done enough. And that's why people consider a lot of the vague talk blah, blah, blah. And the second thing is they've heard it all before. In New York, the plight of New York State is a great example, because I've been hearing it for 40 years and no one's done anything about it. And it doesn't matter if the Democrats or the Republicans are in. And as a result, ultimately a lot of people are turned off from voting because they don't think their vote makes a difference. And that's really a shame, because if you give up, then you've really lost. So the real way is to say, yeah, I believe in this and I'm going to fight for this. And you know what? I'm prepared to lose. That's okay. What I am not prepared to do is to never fight in the first place. So that's, because two people, they get close to winning sometimes and they start to move a little bit on their positions because the focus is on winning the election. I think the best way to be a candidate, ultimately you want to work as hard as you can and you want to win. But ultimately, the goal is to raise issues you care about and stick by your guns. And if you lose, then you have no regrets. And I've lost elections, but I had no regrets because I stuck by my guns. Yeah.
Yeah, Chris, presidential campaign, the candidates promise things which they can't possibly deliver.
Right.
They're all going to cut taxes, but increase government programs.
Right.
Universal Medicare, for instance.
Yeah.
Well, the people see through that. Why do they make promises like that?
Yeah, the question is, the presidential campaign, they're making promises they can't possibly be, cutting taxes and raising spending. And we hear that every campaign. And it's not like we're stupid. You know, it's like, oh yeah, I get that. We're going to cut taxes, raise spending. But part of it is this people's problem. The candidates often tell the people what they want to hear. And you know, they really want to believe it. But they also feel that they don't have a real alternative because they all do the same thing. They all say we're going to cut taxes and raise spending. So the feeling is, well, I'm skeptical about any of my choices. Then I say, okay, well, let's start having different choices. Let's start recruiting people, candidates who are different. They aren't the typical career politicians. They're people that are the leaders of your community that you identify who for years have led your community in a nonprofit or in a business way. They're all over. They're all around us. In fact, they may be you. But the question, those people aren't running. So to really change democracy, we have to have a different pool of applicants for the positions in the first place. And one reason they don't run is they don't know how to do it. That's why this book is very helpful, because it lays it out in terms of how you actually do it. That way you're not relying on the party bosses to tell you how to do it, because they like that. They like the idea that you don't know, because then you have to rely on them for knowledge. And I like the idea that you can learn it yourself, which is what I did. And in many cases, I know the process better than they do now.
And
Yeah.
when you started, the big thing was assessing. Is that how you?
Assessments,
you
yeah.
Yep.
I knew that was an issue because, and when we highlighted it, we sent out a card that said that we merged some databases with all the addresses and then all the assessments and said, this is your assessment. It's based on this certain amount of square footage. This is the assessment of the town board member. They it was much higher. They say the assessments are fair. We don't think so. What do you think? That was a very effective piece. It was a simple piece that said, hey, here's your assessment. There's his. This is how much it is square footage. What do you think? If you want change, you're going to have to vote for it. Yes.
With your emphasis on door-to-door,
Yep.
How do you breach security apartment houses and gated communities?
Tough.
How do you write them off?
It's a challenge. No. I try to get in there. Do I know somebody in the apartments? Can I call them and say, hey, Sally, how about meet me? Let me in. Would you take me around to some of your friends? I look at it two ways. Because it's hard to get in there, if I'm able to get in there, I got the edge, But it's not easy. You have to be mindful of the rules. You don't want to make enemies, by sneaking in the door kind of thing. And you also hit them with mail, obviously. They get a lot of mail and phone calls. But where there's a will, there's a way. And just because it's hard doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. And there's a way of getting into every community. And a lot of that is, of course, knowing somebody in there who's willing to help you out. And ask them what their policy is. Sometimes they say, absolutely nobody in there. Well, then you don't want to go in there. But can I leave my cards, at the desk or something? Whatever they think is appropriate. But those people, and they're oftentimes, they're prime voters. And it's important to make the personal contact with as many of those as possible. But that's a good question. You will encounter hurdles. I have addresses where you can't find them. I'll go from 20 Jones Street to 24 Jones Street, and I got 22 Jones Street on my list. But the more you learn your community, the more you know your way around. I went literally to every street in Gilderland last year, every single street. So when I run again, that's going to be an advantage, because I know the town, and you learn the town. Yes.
In view of the fact that politicians get so severely criticized, why do you want to run for office?
Yeah, my wife asked me that question a lot. I mean, I had a nice business. I got a wonderful family, a cutie pie 5-year-old daughter. And I'm reminded, and I see what's happening is wrong. And my pappy said, Mark, if you don't do it, it won't get done. And I know last year, I was the only town board candidate. No one else wanted to run in the entire town, because they know you're really at a disadvantage. So I talked one of my friends into running with me. So we had 2 people for town board. And I knew if I didn't run, they would just get reelected again with no opposition. And I said, that's not good. So I just said, win or lose, I'm going to start knocking on doors in April. And I think we're applying a level of scrutiny that never existed before. And we're battling now, but I think in the end we're going to make a difference. So I guess the answer is, if I didn't do it, it wouldn't get done. And that's the attitude everybody should take. Because, truthfully, if you don't do it, it won't get done.
I see in the news since you've been elected, our town board meetings in Gilliland, it seems like there are more people coming.
Oh yeah, they're televised, and truthfully, when you're the incumbents and you're in power, you can have people come to the meetings, who want to curry favor with the incumbents, and they come and they've attacked us, so that's not pleasant. But it's single-mindedness of purpose. I know I'm doing the right thing, and I'm going to push forward regardless of what happens. And you really have to develop a thick skin. I guess the two biggest qualities you need are a work ethic and thick skin. And everything else you can learn. So when I look for candidates, I look for somebody who's really willing to do the work, and that they're willing because they're really passionate about what they're doing, and have thick skin. Because if you become a threat, they will come after you with everything they have. Because politics today is about maintaining power. And it doesn't matter if they're Democrats or Republicans. They're about maintaining their power. And in many cases, they will say or do anything to keep that power. And I say, well, why would you, in some ways I hate to talk about this because people say, why the heck would you think I'm ever going to run? And I say, well, because you can make a difference. That's the bottom line. You can make a difference in your community. You can have a direct hand in making your community a better place. Wow, that's exciting stuff. And it's amazing the influence you can have if you're really willing to work.
Last question. Are you part of the Grimm Building Supply Company?
Am I part of the Grimm Building Supply Company? Yeah, we have a heritage there. Grimm Building was started in the late 1800s. My grandfather and his brother started it, and although his brother owned it, well, we have never owned it, but my grandfather ran it for a long time, in fact, when his brother died, but it passed to his nephew. So we never had a piece of the Grimm Building, but we are tied into the heritage. We're the poor Grimms, if you will. But I get asked that a lot.
It was your grandfather who was a tremendous man, one who did all the traveling. And, very impressive.
Well, Carl Grimm was my dad's first cousin. He had the big white beard, the man who traveled to all the continents. He's very well known. And whenever I speak at the Rotaries, that's the first question I get, because he was very active in the Rotary. And he was a tremendous man. He put his own money in to build the Uncle Sam Mall when it was a big hole in the ground in Troy. And he knew he was going to lose money, but he put his own money in because he cared about his community. So I'm sure he has a special place in heaven. There's a question over here.
Do you have examples of how some power people kept their power?
How do people keep their power?
Yes.
Oh, sure. They use the apparatus of government. They raise money by getting money from people who do business with government. And then with this money, they control the message. They buy TV ads, they buy mailing that says whatever they want. So that's the number one way. They have campaign workers for patronage jobs they created. When I try to get somebody there at 10 o'clock on Saturday morning, these are people who are there for one reason, because they believe in me and my message. For incumbents, the people are there because they work for them. Patronage jobs, Albany is a classic example. The state legislature, there is no union in the state legislature. Those are all political appointees, thousands of jobs, and a lot of them spend their time helping incumbents get reelected. So that's a pretty big disadvantage. But using the apparatus of government to further their political cause, the Democrats do it, the Republicans do it. Okay?
Well, thanks, Mark.
You've been great. Your question's been terrific. I appreciate it. I'm glad you're watching at home. And if anyone wants to contact me, markgrimm.com is the way to find me. Thanks for having me here.
Thanks, Steve.
All right, thank you.
Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.